ESL students, Mark and I are back again today, and we're going to talk to you about our hobbies. I don't know if any of you have hobbies, but we both have things that keep us busy and keep us entertained and learning, and this has been the perfect time during quarantine. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark. He's going to talk to you about his still piggy bank collection. It's very interesting, and he's been doing it a long time. So enjoy learning about this.
I got married in 1991. I was working long hours at a bank in West Texas, and she was disappointed that I was spending so much time at the office, and she suggested that if I had a reason to come home or perhaps a hobby, that she would be more inclined to see me and I would have less stress from working all the time. So I sent her off to try and figure out what kind of hobby I should have, and she went through a collection of things that I had saved as a child, including several piggy banks. And so a couple of weeks later she came back and said, I've got your hobby for you. You're going to collect antique piggy banks made of cast iron specifically. So I said, great, let's get started. So we came to Dallas where her parents lived, and went to a couple of garage sales, and they had some piggy banks, and so I bought them all, not knowing what was an original and what was a reproduction. And that started my hobby of collecting antique cast iron piggy banks. Kinds of piggy banks in the world, those that are mechanical, which means that they move, like this Uncle Sam bank here, and like this magician bank here, where you put the penny in and then press the button and there's movement, versus a still bank, which just sits there. And the rest of these are still banks, like building banks, safe banks, like automobile banks, that kind of thing, ships. And I have a variety of mainly still banks because those are less expensive than the mechanical banks. And there's a whole lot more different kind of styles and different colors and different themes. So piggy banks are made out of different kinds of material. I've selected cast iron because the age of the banks and the wear and tear on the banks makes them very delicate over the years, and so cast iron has the greatest likelihood of staying together. And cast iron is just one of many materials that banks are made of. Plastics, when times got more recent, lead, tin, wood, all kinds of different things that banks are made out of, but mine are made out of cast iron, and most of my still banks are made out of cast iron, and they're formed in a mold in two pieces, and those two pieces come together and have a pin that holds them together. Of a cast iron bank, it's an Indian, it's a two-faced Indian, and you have the slot on top where the coins go, and you have the pin holding it together. This was made sometime right after the Civil War, as most of the banks in this collection are made, because at the end of the Civil War, a lot of the factories that were previously making guns and bullets and products for the war, when the war was over, they had nothing to make. So they started turning into factories to make things for consumer goods. And one of the things that they made for consumer goods was banks, mainly for kids. Here's another shelf of banks that I have. You can see there that most of them are building in size and type. And these were made mostly in the Northeast, which is where the factories were in the North after the Civil War was ended. And a lot of them are both historical and political. As an example, here's the Washington Monument, something that people saw every day when they were in Washington, D.C. And here's a building with belfry. Up here is Philadelphia, Boston. So all of the banks were made in the area of Pennsylvania and Ohio and New York and Connecticut. And so the buildings that they had represented those. Here's the Statue of Liberty. Here's the Flatiron Building, one of my favorites. Up here is the Eiffel Tower. And so you see there are a lot of specific buildings, and then you see some more generic buildings. We also have church buildings. This is the New England Church. Down here is the church towers, and you see a variety of different kinds. There are a few banks that were made over in England. This castle with two towers here at the back was made in England. So other countries were represented, but most of the banks were made in the United States. Banks, I didn't have a whole lot to go on, and I didn't have a whole lot of places to buy them at. Most of the antique stores and antique malls out in West Texas don't have a lot of piggy banks because all of the piggy banks were made back in the Northeast. So I got this book. We call it the Bible of penny bank collecting. And the banks that are listed here total about 1,600. And they're all kinds of shapes and sizes and materials. And I would try to learn more about banks as I was starting my collecting habit. Now, banks are rated from A, which is very common, to F, only a few banks known to exist. And because I didn't have any way to collect banks, I had to leave town and go to conventions in the East where auctions were held. An auction is people putting up something to buy and you bid against each other to buy that item, in my case, piggy banks. So I used the book to help me understand the value of the banks and the rating of the bank, A, very common, versus F, only a few known to exist. And then I started gathering information in a database to help me understand what was a good price and a range of prices to pay for my piggy bank. So between having the Bible, having my database, and understanding a little bit about how banks are valued, which in a simple version is only the condition of the bank and the paint of the bank. Because you can see on banks, when kids were playing with them, there was lots of wear and tear and lots of breakage. So for example, my Statue of Liberty bank, you see the green paint at the top and the bottom, but in the middle the paint's wore off, and that's where the kids would handle the banks and wear the paint off. As I got further into my hobby, I realized that one of the best ways to learn more about it and to have access to greater opportunities to buy piggy banks was to join the Still Bank Collectors Club. And the Still Bank Collectors Club is just a group of people like me who are interested in learning more about the history of the banks and collecting banks for their own selves. So the convention that's held every year in a different place and showing different people's collections is something that I always tried to attend when I could. And each year we would go to the convention, and each year I would get a brand new bank, which was made, this case, Still Bank Collectors Club of America 2019. This one represents a monument in the city of Kansas City, which is representative of a monument built there for World War I. So it's kind of an example of things that are going on in and around the convention sites. Here's the Still Bank Collector Club official mascot, if you will. It's a rocking horse, which I added to my collection. It's a limited edition, but it has more sentimental value to me than it does monetary value. About whether some of the banks were valuable, some are less valuable. Some of them hold sentimental value to me. Talked about steel banks versus mechanical. I'll end the presentation with a brief story about my collecting habits and having kids, particularly on the mechanical banks, because in the mechanical bank world, because they're so old, because they're so fragile, things have a tendency to break. And so I wanted to have a bank that I could show my kids and have them be interested in the collection without actually damaging the collection. So I bought this bank, the Trick Dog Bank, cost about $12, but I bought it specifically so that the kids would have something to play with and be interested in my collection without damaging my collection. So the Trick Dog Bank served that purpose. And the Trick Dog Bank is a lot like other mechanical banks where you put a penny, in this case in the dog's mouth, and then you press the button on the side. The dog jumps through the hoop and deposits the penny into the barrel. So that's my sentimental bank. And my daughter, when I asked her what collection a piece that she would like for me to keep forever and ever, she made sure that this was one of them. My personal favorite out of the mechanical bank group is this bank, Panorama Bank. And it's a mechanical bank from the standpoint that you put a penny in it and it moves, but the piece that moves is inside this glass window. And inside the glass window is a round wooden dowel, and the dowel is covered with pictures such that when you put a penny in, the pictures rotate. So the child can see different pictures as they save money. It's a mechanical bank, and because it has both wood and metal and paper, it's kind of unusual from that aspect of the three different materials. So that's my hobby, collecting banks. And because I'm a banker and enjoyed saving money, this is a good way to demonstrate the importance and value of saving money. So I hope you enjoyed it, and if there's any questions, holler at me when you can. Thanks, bye.
Hope you guys enjoyed learning about Mark's hobby. As he mentioned, when we moved to Midland, he worked all the time, and I didn't have much to fill my days other than a part-time job. So I too found a hobby. I started needle pointing. And one thing that I did, one project, was to take one of his banks, and I had somebody paint it and turned it into a needlepoint canvas. So that was a way to combine both of our hobbies. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about that craft. It dates back to really the Egyptians. They found some needlepoint in one of the pharaoh's tombs, and it's been through Middle Ages. You see it in churches, and perhaps some of the embroidery needlepoint things you've seen in your culture as well. But when I discovered it, I had thought it was a craft that was just on canvas and one stitch, and I discovered that it was a whole lot more than that. These are a couple of the first things that I did. Little soldiers for Christmas pillows, and they incorporate a lot of different fibers and a lot of different stitches. So I'm going to tell you about that. Okay, so a needlepoint project starts with a canvas. It's a plastic mesh woven, and then an artist actually hand paints the design onto the canvas. You can maybe find needlepoint in a craft store, but that would have been stamped on there and mass produced. But this type of canvas actually costs about, I don't know, $120, because it's hand painted, and it's painted so each cross section of the mesh will be the perfect stitch and the perfect color. So kind of like paint by number, where you follow the color and then you put your fibers on there. This is one that I'm working on now. It's Lady and the Tramp having their little spaghetti underneath a moon. So I'm doing a different stitch for the moon, and I'll do a different fiber for the puppy noses and fur-like wools for the puppy fur. So you can get a variety of textures and depth with different fibers. And just like Mark had a still bank Bible, none of these compared with the Bible that we study in church. But that just means it's a reference for doing something in our case. This is a reference book for needlepoint stitches. You can see it's well worn, and the pages are just filled, with different stitches, an illustration, and a photo to show you what each stitch can be used for. And when you go to make your needlepoint project, you can go through here, and it's a good how-to on using different stitches and what fits in different size areas on your canvas. There are a couple of my finished pieces. I did a little holiday series. This is a Christmas angel. This is a little witch with trick-or-treaters, and she's got a funny nose on. Here's Uncle Sam for the 4th of July. And this was a piece, my daughter Tess started learning how to needlepoint, and then school started, so she stopped. So I finished up this project for her. When I get a project to do, I usually put together a stitch guide. And this was for a Christmas stocking that I did. And it talks about the different areas that you'll be stitching, and the fiber that you should use, and what stitch that you should use. You can create it yourself, or you can have a needlepoint professional come up with that for you. Okay, so this is the fun part of needlepoint. The fibers make or break the piece that you're working on. Traditionally, a lot of wools were used for projects. We've got some wool blends and some basic wools, which is kind of more of a sweater type of fiber. And then we've got some cottons that are over dyed, so you see a variegation of the colors, a light purple and a dark purple, all in one strand of fiber. We've got our metallics, and these two were actually used for glow-in-the-dark projects, possibly for Halloween. And we come down here to the neon rays. They have a lot of shimmer. This may be what I use for my puppy dog noses so that the doggies' noses will be shiny like a real dog. And a nylon type of a shimmery fiber for snow, which will reflect the light, kind of like the snow will glisten. And over here we have our velvets, which are used for a Santa Claus suit or reindeer antlers or just something that you want soft and fuzzy. And these are some of my favorites. These are used for bunny rabbits, Santa Claus beards. They're called whisper alpaca. They're actual fibers, and as you would use for clothing, you can use them for needlepoint. So it really adds a lot of dimension, and then you can add off with embellishments like beads or sequins. And this is what makes the project fun, picking out the fibers and deciding on the stitch that you want to use. So these are my favorite things. These are our Christmas stockings, and I make a lot of little pieces, but as the years have gone on and I've gotten busier, I don't needlepoint that much anymore. But the first one that I did, the big piece, was for Mark, and this was a Christmas stocking by Peter Ash, and I used the same artist for my stocking. This being one of my first is one of my simpler stitches, but I did a stitch called Turkey Work, where you can kind of actually see that the fur on his coat is raised and his beard has cuffs and lots of metallic adornment. Mine was a horse that Santa was riding in on, and I gave him a mane, and he actually has bells on the horse, and I used one of the wool fibers for the horse hair. And this was really fun. Really enjoyed this. When the kids got older, I let them pick out their stockings. Mark's mother had made a felt applique stocking for each of them when they were born, but I made their needlepoint stockings, and you could see the fuzzy bear and lots of beard detail with varieties of whites. We've got the French knots for his fur trim, and then a turkey work on the end of his hat. There's lots of velvet on his suit. So this was a lot of fun. Over here on the list of naughty and nice, I put our family names, so we know Santa will come to see us. And the last thing you always do is put the name on. This is Luke's stocking. The biggest memory I have with this is that my daughter had to have a lot of medical treatments at one point, and I would always bring this with me to work on it. I did little tassels on his reindeer. Their antlers are velvet, shiny for his sleigh with lots of gold on the wheels, and tiny little French knots for all the lights in the city as Santa flies over before delivering the toys. And when he got married, Luke, I decided I would do a stocking cuff. It's not as much work and it's not as expensive. So when Tess gets married, we'll do one for her husband, and then as they have children, hopefully we'll do that. But she chose snowmen, lots of the shiny, shimmery whites on that. And then you can see how the stockings are made. When you finish the canvas, you send it to a finisher, and they turn it into a stocking. They line it in satin, and then they will embroider a message. So I have the year and a message to Amanda, wishing her many happy Christmases with our family. So that's been something that's kept me busy over the years, and it's a nice tradition every year to put them out by the fireplace. And just hope that you're inspired to pick up a hobby that you may not have touched for a while, or find something new to do. And we've really enjoyed sharing this time with you and look forward to getting back together in person soon. Have a great day, and don't forget to wash your hands.